Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rocky Top Insider Diamond Pass podcast, the first Diamond Pass podcast of 2026 and, of course, of the 2026 season. I'm your host, Jack Foster, joined alongside Ryan Schumpert, coming at you here on this Monday evening. You're likely listening on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Just know, though, it is game week, ladies and gentlemen. Friday is opening day for Tennessee baseball, who will host Nichols in a 3-game series right here in Knoxville at the newly renovated Lindsey Nelson Stadium, which you can just keep that newly renovated on a repeat for the past couple of years because eventually renovations will stop. We won't be saying that anymore. For the time being, every year it's been newly renovated. LNS, it's been a while since we have done a Diamond Pass, of course, I believe since Josh ElandEra became or was announced as the head coach of Tennessee baseball. So Ryan, obviously we have talked since then, but first Diamond Pass in a while. How you doing?
Doing well, yeah. Glad to be back on here, and I can't. Did we record one after Elander was official? I can't remember if we did. Yeah, I think we did. I don't know. That all runs together. But even since then, obviously a lot of changes in the program with some departures with Tony to San Francisco and a number of hires that Elander has made. So been a lot going on, and yeah, I think it being game week and starting to work on some of my previews here early this week. It's got me excited and ready to go.
Are you more of a fan of Tennessee opening the season at home against a really weak opponent, or are you a fan of Tennessee opening the season in a neutral site location against tough teams?
I think I like it the easy series at home. For a couple reasons. I think one, from just our perspective, I think the opening weekends has interest level to it no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And the pre-SEC slate can get pretty monotonous, and I'd rather not waste the good series, the good weekend on the opening weekend. It's already going to be interesting either way. So from that standpoint, that's how I feel about it. And then I think for Tennessee's standpoint, it makes sense to kind of give yourself a little bit to tinker and test what you think your best options are and who you trust the most. Not that stuff's going to change a ton before week 2, or in this instance, week 3 when they head to Texas. But it gives you a little bit of time, and for Tennessee's standpoint of like, this hasn't really been an issue in the past, but this year they've lost a lot of practice time because of the snow in Knoxville.
Yeah.
So, I could see Tennessee being a little bit sloppy early just because they haven't had a ton of time outside. And when you're going to have to go play quality competition, especially like UCLA, who has not had to deal with that weather, I'd rather have a couple weeks to get ready for that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day about the neutral site tournament versus series at home. And, I like the excitement of that neutral site tournament kicking off the season. But you're right. Opening weekend has intrigue anyway. And it's good to break up the monotonous stretch of just 10-run win after 10-run win. You get a full month of that. Thankfully, a couple of years ago, we actually had Illinois that Tennessee played on the schedule. So that was a little better, even though Tennessee largely dominated that series. It still is a Power 4 team. So, but yeah, for the most part, these non-con series are just, it's going to happen before it even starts.
Yeah, and there has been, like you said, Illinois. There's occasionally been that they played Georgia Southern 2 years, and they were, one of those years they were almost a region host. And then Indiana once early in Tony's tenure. And I will say, I don't think Kent State's on that level, but Kent State should have a pretty good team this year, like a legit chance to win the MAC. So I think that's the toughest opponent Tennessee plays in their 3 lesser series that they play to start the year.
So safe to say Kent State baseball is better than Kent State football. That is
yes, definitely safe to say.
And your point about, there not being a lot of practice time with the snow and the weather and everything that has happened in East Tennessee, I agree, because it feels like the season has crept up more this year than in years past, at least for me personally. And maybe it's just because other things going on or whatnot, but it just feels like it is like last weekend. I was like, holy cow, the season's in a week. Like it just has, come so quickly. And maybe it's just because college football season's being pushed later and later too. I think that has something to do with it, because the gap between football season and baseball season starting isn't as large anymore. But yeah, it's here. And the ElandEra, which, if you take anything from this season preview podcast, take that ElandEra should be The shirt should be printed. That should be all over the stadium, all over the social media. Tennessee should be running with that. I have commented it on numerous Tennessee baseball tweets. I do not know why they have not used it yet. It is a layup. Like, I'm not crazy. That is just the layup of all layups. The Elandera. Like, come on. They've tweeted or made a graphic that has said ElandEra half a dozen times at least. It's staring you in the face. In fact, my dad told me I'm an idiot for not trademarking it, which I'm too lazy to do that anyway. I don't know how the hell to do it to begin with.
You're giving it to him. You're a good guy.
Yeah. I'm like, hey, I'm giving you like a gold mine for free. Run with it.
Yeah, no, you're right. They're sitting on a cave of diamonds, and they're not looking for it.
Yeah, you can't tell me those shirts wouldn't sell.
Like,
they would sell like crazy. I know for a fact. But Ryan, lots to get into today. We have a roster to look at. We have position battles to break down. So buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking a 60 to 90-minute podcast. This is our biggest podcast of the year, I would say. And
unless
probably
Tennessee
our
wins
best.
the national championship. Unless Tennessee wins the national championship, and then we go about 60, 90 minutes to recap the season.
Right. Yeah, of course. But lots to get into today. So, of course, the first year with Josh Elander at the helm, the vibe will be different. And there's no getting around that. Tony Vitello was such an icon at Tennessee. He brought this certain amount of energy and attention to his program. It will be different, but of course, Josh Elander is a Tony Vitello disciple. He did coach under him for many years. So you have that. So you're still from that tree. You still have that similar identity, but it will be its own. Ryan, this is kind of a broad question, but what is the vibe you've gotten attending all of these fall practices since Tony's departure and spring practices here in the past 2 weeks? How has the vibe shifted, if at all, with Josh at the helm, comparing it to Tony? Like, have you noticed a strong difference at all in how this program will attack things?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a strong difference. I do think there's been a little bit more emphasis on defensive stuff. Just from just for instance, last week when they were just going through like warm-ups or like drills, and people were doing push-ups, the whole infield was doing push-ups when errors were committed. I think they've moved guys around a little bit less, but it's still a lot of guys that can play multiple spots. So I don't think it's from a day-to-day, it looks a ton different. I do feel like on game day, it's going to look different just without, Tony and Frank were such fiery guys. I don't think you're going to have that from that same standpoint. So I do think that part's different. But as a whole, it hasn't been a ton when I've been over there that it makes it feel radically different or anything like that.
Yeah, Josh Elander is just an all business type of dude. You get that sense in the first conversation you'd ever have with him. He is a baseball guy and he is all business all the time. I feel like this program's in good hands. We talked about that ad nauseum back in the fall as well. Like, Josh Elander was the hire to make for Tennessee. And while it is a continuation of what Tony built, it will be altered, of course, because Josh is his own coach and things will be done his way. Other changes, as we mentioned a little bit, no Frank Anderson, no Quentin Eberhardt. Frank went with Tony and Q2 with Tony to San Fran. But Tennessee has replenished the coaching staff. Huge hire in Chuck Girolman from Florida, who is the associate head coach, and Josh Reynolds, now the pitching coach at Tennessee. Ross Kivett got a promotion as well. So a lot of familiar faces, and then you have Girolman as the new addition to this coaching staff, which seems to be looking pretty good heading into the first year of this new era.
Yeah, no doubt. Sean McCann was the video coordinator. He also went with Tony to San Francisco. Keegan Knoll is Q's replacement as the strength coach, and then Craig Bell is another guy they brought on the staff. I can't remember exactly what his title is. Some sort of development. Let's see if I can find it here real quick. Director of program development. And he's a guy that spent a lot of time with Girolman at Florida. He was an assistant coach at Florida for 15 years, and then the last couple of years he's been working in the Padres organization. So, a handful of changes. a handful of new faces, but mostly when you're talking about the assistant coaches, it's
Mhm.
pretty similar. Which are all in is the only addition, and then Reynolds stepping up into a bigger role. But he was, even today on Monday, Evan Blanco talking with the media talked about how even before Frank left, Frank was kind of the voice and was adding a lot, but a lot of the hands-on work was already being done by Josh Reynolds. So,
Yeah.
it's not a massive change from that standpoint.
Roster wise, of course, it's going to look different in new age college sports and the transfer portal. I mean, Tennessee only returned 4 pitchers. That is
Yeah.
pretty wild to just think about. That how deep a college baseball pitching staff is, and to only return 4 guys. Whole lot of turnover. Offensively, same way, replacing 6 of 9 position starters, but there was quite a few depth pieces that returned that are having more experience and are bound for larger roles, which we will of course get into. But first, the entire infield pretty much is going to be replaced. Manny Marin will start, likely not in the same spot he did last year, but 3 of 4 infield starters to be replaced. Catcher, there'll be some familiarity, but also some new faces, and then 2 of the outfield spots, of course, with Bargo off to NC State, Inslee, the pros, and then retiring from professional baseball. But Reese Chapman back in right field, which maybe was a little bit of a surprise back then. The polls, just real quick, final note before we get into some more news and notes. Tennessee, 15th, USA Today coaches poll, 13th, Baseball America, and split the difference, 14th in D1 baseball. Perfect Game, always been high on Tennessee in this decade. I believe Perfect Game was the first poll in 22 to put Tennessee in that top spot. They have Tennessee third, and the league coaches predicted Tennessee to finish 6th in the conference behind LSU, Texas State, Mississippi State, that is, Arkansas, and Auburn. Ryan, were there any surprises, any takeaways from the preseason prognostication of this Tennessee baseball team so far?
Yeah, I was surprised when Perfect Game had Tennessee number 3, and that was the first one that came out. So,
Right.
I think it really caught me off guard. But no, I generally, I mean, maybe a little bit higher than those other sites have Tennessee, but that's kind of how I felt. And then the 10 to 15 range to me kind of feels like where I would pencil this team in to start the season. And, but it's a very, very difficult sport. Very difficult sport to project. I mean,
yeah.
22 and 24, I think Tennessee was low top 10 or outside the top 10. And 23 and 25, Tennessee was number 2, I think, both those seasons.
Yeah.
So it's we'll see what actually happens on the field when they get out there.
And lots of good series for Tennessee this year too. I mentioned LSU, Texas, and Mississippi State picked to finish top 3 in the SEC. Well, Tennessee gets all of those. Don't get Arkansas or Auburn, who round it at top 5. Still plenty of other tough opponents. You get Vandy on the road. We'll see what Ole Miss is, but they're Kentucky, same way. That's a road trip too. Lexington can be fickle with baseball weather. So it's a tough schedule, I think, Ryan, a very entertaining schedule. Lots of series to circle as ones that, will be a lot of fun, at least entertainment wise.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a very entertaining schedule. I think the Mississippi State one, like that was one you just, as a environment to play in, you circled it anyway, but the hire Brian O'Connor and the team they put together, it seems to add an extra level to that. And then, you talk about getting LSU at home.
Yeah, that's the big one.
That's, defending national champions. That rivalry has obviously become so big. So that's probably the home series I'm most excited for. And then, obviously Texas is really good too. Yeah,
the connection.
Yeah, which is probably a little bit more friendly now. I think Elander has a much better relationship with Schloss than Tony did. But that'll be entertaining. And then, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt. I mean, I think even Georgia that first weekend will be very interesting. That's one I wish was a little bit later, just from the overlap of basketball standpoint, and a trip I would like to make. But as SEC play typically is, I thought going through the order of prediction, and I don't have this right in front of me, the stats, it kind of reminded me of Tennessee football, how it's been the last 2 years, where they play a lot at the top, not really many in the middle, and then a lot at the bottom. When you have like Kentucky, Missouri, Ole Miss, we're all predicted to kind of finish near the bottom of the league. Maybe a couple
Bama too.
Bama, Oklahoma, I think, was predicted to finish near the bottom. So it's like Or it feels like no one between like 6 and 11. I guess Tennessee is 6, so no one between like 7 and 11 that Tennessee plays. And Auburn
Ah,
5, so they don't play them. So no one between 5 and 11 maybe Tennessee plays. So a lot of the teams that are supposed to be the best in the league, and then a lot of teams that are projected to be at the bottom.
right. What do you know why the Oklahoma series is in Oklahoma City?
Not particularly. I mean, what I was told about it is that they just are trying to play a little bit there from an interest standpoint. And, something like 30, 40 minutes from Norman. But, I don't know exactly why Tennessee or, exactly what the deal is. But I think
Hmm,
from what I've been told is they basically want to try to do that once a year.
gotcha. Makes sense. Well, some news and notes. It's good we are podcasting after there was a press conference Monday morning on campus because some injury news came out regarding this weekend. First of which, well, I should maybe not the most important or most shocking, but the key player of all these four that has a significant note is Brandon Arvidsson. He will not begin the season as a starter, as Josh Elander announced the starting rotation of Tegan Kuhns on Friday, Landon Mack, the Rutgers transfer sophomore, on Saturday, and then Evan Blanco, the Star Virginia transfer lefty, he will start Sunday. So Brandon Arvidsson, the biggest shock of the offseason was him returning to Tennessee after not being drafted in the first 3 rounds of the MLB draft. He's expected to, of course, pitch many, many valuable innings for Tennessee, be one of their best arms, potentially a starter. We'll see what happens, but if not, definitely the top bullpen option. But he's got some arm soreness right now. Tennessee's taking it slow. If Elander treats injuries like Tony will, you know that in February, things are going to be taken very, very cautiously with a lot of caution here. So I would expect the same with Brandon Arvidsson. TBD if we even see him this weekend, Ryan, but not beginning the season as a starter.
Correct. He hasn't faced batters any this preseason. So Elander said he threw the ball inside some last week, and kind of left it up. So he's going to throw again here in the next day or two, and kind of wouldn't say whether he would throw this weekend until after seeing what he does next couple days. But yeah, if I was a betting man on this one, I would bet that we don't see him at all this weekend, and they take it slow with him. And but yeah, I think that kind of made the starting rotation, deciding it short term, kind of easier. I think it kind of left 3 pretty obvious options to be the guys this weekend. But I think it makes it kind of interesting long term when he does get back, because I think he's going to be the best pitcher on this Tennessee team.
2 that will definitely not be playing for Tennessee against Nichols are Blake Grimmer, who, remember, he was the midweek hero a year ago, many big midweek moments last year, and then got some key playing time late in the season, but he will not play in the Nichols series. Lower back injury he's working his way back from, doesn't sound serious. Garrett Wright, the Bowling Green transfer catcher / outfielder, he had wrist surgery, so he will continue to stay on the shelf, will not play this weekend. But those 2 guys, we'll see what I think. Those 2, along with some others, it's really interesting to see what kind of role they're going to play on this team. The catcher spot, you have Stone Lawless and you have Garrett Wright. What kind of rotation happens there, I think, is intriguing. And then with Blake Grimmer, he could start at left field. Maybe he gets some infield work, a lot of DH work potentially. He can mash. So these 2 guys, while injured right now, 2 guys that, I think a lot of people will be keeping a keen eye on to see what kind of role they fulfill.
Definitely, Grimmer felt like a bit of an X factor to me, and how he could factor on this team, because certainly he's had some major flashes and has some pop, and just a lefty bat could kind of balance out the righty lefty situation a little bit more. Tennessee, not crazily, but a little bit more righty heavy than they are with lefties. So his is the one that I think is the most interesting. And then what exactly does things look like for Garrett Wright? I mean, he could factor in the outfield too. He's worked there a good bit. Levi, Levi Clark's going to be the starting first baseman, but I think he still would like to get some work at catching. Does he get midweek innings there? Trent Grinlinger is a freshman catcher who has been really good. So what exactly does all that look like behind Stone Lawless? And obviously with catcher, especially early in the season, you'll often see it be 2-2. Starts in a week. So how does all that factor? Could it be 2-1-1 when Wright gets back? So it'll be interesting to see.
All right, let's kick it off with our roster breakdown, talking about the pitching side of things first. So we talked about the starting rotation here in opening weekend of Coons and Mac and Evan Blanco, 2 transfers, 1 returner. Let's start with the returner and kind of focusing on these starters for Tennessee to start things off here. Tegan Coons, last year as a true freshman, you saw the talent. Even early in the season in Houston, you saw what he could do on the mound and how he could give opposing batters fits. I mean, the stuff was nasty right off the jump there in Houston. Battled illness early in the season, got him a little behind, but it always felt like Tegan Coons had a shelf life to his appearances. It was Tony maybe didn't trust him a lot early in the season, and he would be pulled even if he was playing well. And then later in the season, things just kind of devolved a little bit for him. Ultimately, didn't even pitch past Hoover. So, what are you expecting from Tegan Coons? We know the talent is there, the upside through the roof in his draft eligible sophomore season. What do you kind of see in his season looking like here in year 2?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. Like, you want to see, and I do expect, a level of more consistency and more trust. I think he followed it up with a good offseason. He went to Cape Cod and threw the ball well there. He hasn't really had any setbacks that I know of from an injury standpoint. And I feel like he's gotten a full workload of what you'd want to see in the fall and in the preseason. So, all that stuff's good. Has he just looked overwhelmingly dominant when I've seen him pitch? Not necessarily. He's been solid. He's been good. But he doesn't, it doesn't look like Liam Doyle did last offseason either. So,
Right.
I'll be curious to see. I expect improvement. I expect him to have a longer leash, to go deeper into games. How much longer? What exactly that looks like. How much better is he going to be? That I'm kind of unclear on that.
Landon Mack from Rutgers, I think he was arguably the prized portal land from the pitching side of things for Tennessee, because you had strong relievers, Hindi, Rudy, Frederick, and Blanco was a good land, but he was coming off a kind of awkward 2025 season, was a stud in 24 when Virginia went to Omaha. But Landon Mack was stellar in his true freshman season at Rutgers. Just over 4 ERA, went 6-5, 1.22 WHIP, over 80 innings pitched on the year, 70 Ks, 20% strikeout rate. He was really, really solid for the Scarlet Knights. But then, you guys reporting, you, Eric Kane, Mike Wilson, everybody, tremendous group of people who cover fall baseball, Ben McKee. It was a little bit of, rough stretch for him out the gate. What have you seen from Mac specifically this spring? And, do you think he's going to be a guy that can definitely be a strong starter for Tennessee all year long?
Yeah, I wasn't there when he pitched on what I believe was Friday night this past weekend, so I haven't seen him throw. It seemed like he was solid, not great from what I heard. I think good for a couple innings and then kind of fell off towards the end. I would say he has, to me, has underwhelmed compared to just the
To
super high
expectation.
expectations.
Right.
And even today, Josh ElandEra said like a little bit of Chase Elander, and that was kind of a comp that you heard people say when Tennessee got him. And I just haven't quite seen it to that standpoint from, again, those are just really high expectations. Can he be, a really good starter for Tennessee? I think so. I think the talent is clearly there. There's a reason everybody wanted him. I guess the thing I would say that he's not quite as much swing and miss stuff, as I would like to see from a top end SEC starter. And, that was a little bit of a knock on him too. Last year at Rutgers, he didn't have a ton of strikeouts. So, we'll see what ends up happening there. It's not like I, don't think he's going to have a good year or anything, but not exactly sure what to expect, I guess.
Well, by all accounts, the stuff is really good. Elander called it gross and raved about the kind of stuff he has. Big time heater, a couple of breaking balls. So, I'm intrigued to see what he looks like, because I feel like he's the biggest. I mean, I think Coons' upside is the biggest question mark of this trio potentially, but what Mac even is for Tennessee, I think is the bigger question mark, because that Coons he's bound to have a good year and to be a solid pitcher for Tennessee on the starting rotation. And I think Evan Blanco, what he can be given what he did 2 years ago. Last year was just a weird year for him with the injury. So Landon Mack, a bit of an unknown. And he pitched Big Ten ball. It's just drastically different when pitching in the ACC or SEC. So he hasn't quite faced the talent he's going to face this year. Which brings me to Evan Blanco, the lefty of the group and the elder statesman. He's a senior, of course, going to start Sunday for Tennessee. But I mentioned last year, not near as good of a year as he had in 24, 3-5 record, 6.23 ERA, 39 innings pitched a year ago. But when he was a sophomore, he was 8-3, 3.62 ERA, 1.29 WHIP, and almost pitched 100 innings on the season. He was the Friday night guy on a team that made it to Omaha. So I think there's a lot to be excited about with Evan Blanco. You've seen him pitch some. What have you seen, and what do you think the expectation should be for him going into the season?
Yeah, I've seen him pitch a lot. That's kind of the way some of this stuff works. In the fall, most of these guys are thrown in scrimmages on the same day, and then just kind of naturally your schedule, one day of the week it works out better for you to make it over there. And for me, I don't even know what day it was, but that was the day Evan Blanco was throwing. It felt like. So I watched him a ton, and I thought he was really good. A little bit of a, it's after watching him surprised me a little bit that like he was an ace on a College World Series team and like a big brand like Virginia, just from the standpoint of he doesn't have the overwhelming stuff. It's not like he's pumping in, upper 90s, but just a ferocious competitor. Little bulldog is what I'd nicknamed him.
Okay. That's good. Tennessee thrives off guys like that. They always have in this decade.
A little bit of the vibe I get is a little bit of like a lefty Chad Dallas, where I think he's better than the stuff indicates. So I'm excited about him. To me, and maybe this is a crazy thing to say because he did struggle last year, but I think injuries had a big part to do with that. I think he almost has the highest floor of the three starters for Tennessee.
I think you have to say he has a higher floor than Mack just because he's been around the block, and Coons, it kind of just completely fell off for him. So if that continues, then Tennessee's not going to be able to start him. It has to bounce back for him, and I think we all expect it to, but still remains to be seen. Of course, Brandon Arvidsson is the fourth person we put in this group because when he's 100%, he could start for Tennessee. Now he could not. If Mack, Blanco, and Coons are dealing, then there's no reason for Arvidsson to start, given what he can do for you out of the bullpen. He could be a Nate Snead for Tennessee, and maybe even better, especially better than what Snead gave you a year ago. But look, Brandon Arvidsson had a weird year last year in terms of he was just a fringe guy who got some SEC innings here and there. It always felt like Tony Vitello kept giving him more opportunities than we'd expect him to get, given what the production was in the first half and middle part of SEC ball. But you saw what he can do in Hoover against Texas and continued that in the regional. Was solid against Arkansas, not as good, but still okay. And look, I think that has a lot of people excited about what Brandon Arvidsson could be for Tennessee. You kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning of this thing that he could be Tennessee's best pitcher. Maybe he's in all likelihood going to be that. So lefty with a ton of great stuff. I will never forget what he did against Texas and Hoover. So I think he's going to be a fan favorite this year, and rightfully so.
Yeah, he repaid Tony Vitello's trust for sure. And I think he was a big part of Tennessee finding some answers late in the season, and not like Tennessee just completely turned things around. But for a while there, it didn't look like Tennessee was going to be a team that made it to a super regional. And, Arvidsson, I think, was a big part of that and what he did. And really, he just got the walk rate down. His strikeout rate was high all season, but he stopped, offering a lot of free passes and became pretty darn dominant. So, overwhelming stuff. You talk about nasty. Like, it's
the best stuff on the roster, and it's not close.
Yeah, yes, and that's what I'm just thinking of. I'm trying to go through everything. I wouldn't. I would almost say he's got the highest ceiling of any Tennessee player when you talk about what his pro career could look like.
Right. Yeah, that's very fair. Do you think he will ultimately become a weekend starter for Tennessee?
Yeah, I think it probably has more to do with what the three guys in front of him do.
Of course.
But yeah, I think naturally, like I think naturally, one of those guys is going to struggle. Like if you're going to tell me, I don't know which one it's going to be, but I just think that would be my bet that one of those guys struggles and Arvidsson ends up, stepping in as a starting pitcher.
Could he be the guy? Do you see him being, if he is a reliever? We saw how long he can go in games. Would you expect him to be a piggyback on a certain day and just go really long in one given game? Or do you think he could be a guy that, the Joshes will want to use multiple times in a weekend and maybe just in certain situations, specifically late game spots?
I see there's two things here that make me to me, I have two trains of thought, I guess.
Mhm.
My first thought is I would think it would be a late inning, high leverage situation. The fact that he can strike out guys at the rate that he can, I think, is such a weapon. And from the standpoint of it's like he can be a starter. So if one of these guys is struggling and you have to have a piggyback, why not just start him? That's kind of my first thought.
Yeah,
Why not just start him in that situation?
that's fair.
My reverse is I would say my trust ranking on the bullpen. I just like some of the lefty arms more than the righty arms. So then it's kind of like with that standpoint. Well, if you got other lefty arms you like, it could maybe make a little bit of a log jam if you have Arvidsson as a late inning guy too. Not necessarily. It's not like you can't just have multiple lefty. A lot of left-handed guys you trust. But that's kind of my two trains of thought on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned the lefty arms, and we'll get into the high end relievers here because Arvidsson will be in this group to at least start the season when he does pitch. But there's about 6 to 7 guys I think that could become high end relievers for Tennessee. A couple that you feel really confident about. I mentioned some of the transfers. You have Bo Rudy, you have Mark Hindy, you have Brady Frederick, and you have Braden Krenzel, from a
Yeah.
season ago who you know, was I feel like Ryan every year, and maybe we can not do it this year, but I think every single season there's been one guy to slip through the cracks of this preview pod that we just do not mention enough. It's Hunter Ensley infamously in 23, and last year it was Braden Krenzel. But really, who saw that coming? He was pitching ninth innings in midweeks to start the year. He was like at the bottom of the midweek group. And then, in that ETSU game, he built some really quality outings in midweeks and got trust in SEC ball and did really well. So of this group, and Blaine Brown I'll throw in there as well, of this group of transfers and Braden Krenzel, who do you think that Tennessee is going to put the trust in most, and who have you been most impressed with and what you've seen?
Yeah, I think Bo Rudy is the one that stands out, the Kennesaw State transfer. He's been
Fastball
really
is crazy, right, with him?
it's the movement on the fastball that's crazy. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily the velo still low 90s, but he throws it a ton and it was super, super effective. And that's carried over to Tennessee and facing more, SEC level hitters. So he's the guy I would say I trust the most. I've liked Mark Hindy a lot, the Duke transfer. Was it William and Mary before that? Super senior type guy.
Mhm.
I like him a lot. And then, Cameron Appenzeller, I
The
think also
freshman
has
lefty.
a freshman
Yep.
lefty has a really high ceiling. So those are the guys I'd probably say. Rudy definitely number one, and then I like Hindy and Appenzeller a lot. Krenzel to me, that's kind of like high leverage. It's kind of my thought process there. Krenzel to me kind of still feels like more of a long reliever, a middle reliever that then has to be 4 innings, but eat 2 innings, at a time in the middle of a game because I just think he has a little bit less high end.
So kind of
Um,
a bridge guy.
More of a bridge guy, yeah. Less high end stuff. He does more like starter stuff and starter competitiveness, in
Yes.
my opinion. So I think he's going to have a huge role. Though I'm not necessarily sure it looks like the end of game lockdown guy. And then I guess lastly with Brady Frederick, he's one I'm really interested to see because he's gotten some All American, preseason All American honors.
Yeah. Highly touted dude.
Highly touted dude. He's struggled a lot when I watched him in the fall. Now I will say this past Sunday he threw best outing I think I've seen him throw. But he struggled a lot. Like he had a hard time missing barrels. Now what I'll say when you're talking about a side armor, and a low slot guy, the value in that is how it's unique and you haven't seen it. Well, Tennessee's guys are sitting there and they've seen it all fall, and they start to know what it looks like, and they have experience against him. So I think that is worth keeping in mind amidst his struggle. So I kind of balance those two things of what exactly to expect with him. But I think at the very least, he's so unique that he's going to be a a situational option, and it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up earning a bigger role and ends up having a really nice season. It would surprise me if he's an All-American, but
Right.
if he has a really nice season, that wouldn't surprise me.
Cam Appenzeller unquestionably going to be the top freshman of this freshman pitching staff this year. Like,
Yeah,
there's just no way it can't be that.
I mean, it would definitely surprise me if
Yeah.
it wasn't. I think he's definitely the most talented. I think he could very easily be the guy that Vol fans are clamoring for the most. I feel like Teagan was kind of that last year. Just a little bit of the element of the unknown, the big recruit, the talented guy. Like
Yeah.
he has that. How quickly can he hit the ground running in college is always going to be a question for a guy like that. Adjust to just pitching out of the bullpen because he's been a starting pitcher for a long, long time. But a super, super talented pitcher.
So sounds like you're very confident that Rudy, Hindi, Krenzel will definitely pitch a lot of important SEC innings this year out of the bullpen.
Definitely, and I would throw Appenzeller in there too. Like, it would
Appenzeller.
surprise me if not, but there's just more unknown since he
So
has to pitch to this level.
Yeah, I wonder how they if they treat him with training gloves, kid gloves to start, or if he's just thrown to the wolves, against Georgia, first SEC weekend, he's getting time. Yeah, I guess the first true test will be Arlington, right? Like, will he pitch important innings in those games? Because sometimes with young guys you can just wait a little bit, but not that Tennessee has been tentative with that kind of stuff in the Vitello era. Like, if a freshman has been great, they've gotten time out the gate. So
yeah, exactly. Teagan was a little bit of an exception to that last year.
Yeah,
and obviously
he was sick too. I think was a huge part of that.
Definitely, but even the rest of the season, it felt like not that he didn't have opportunities, but it just it felt like he was treated a little bit more as a freshman than a lot of guys have.
And I think Tony was kind of proven right in the end, him or Frank, whoever was leading that part of pulling him early, because kind of showed at the end of the year that after a couple innings, Coons wasn't delivering the way he was initially in his outings. Blaine Brown, the last name I wanted to mention as far as who could see, important relief innings. I know he's a two-way guy, and look, he could start in the outfield for Tennessee, but do you think he will pitch what do you see his role being on this pitching staff, I guess? Because talk about a fan favorite, super talented guy, played against Tennessee last year, started on the mound for Rice. I think fans could really gravitate towards this dude. But what do you see his role being on the mound?
I think it's going to be smaller, and I think they've moved more in that direction too since the coaching staff change. The comp I've been making, I could see Marcus Phillips 2024.
Right, just the high velo
the high velo, maybe come in for a big out or something like that in an SEC game in very short spurts where he can leave it all out there. I could see that. I will say of note, on Sunday, he was like an opener in the scrimmage. He came in and threw the first inning. So, if things do go wrong for Tennessee's starting pitching staff, maybe that could end up being an option. But no, I think, especially early in the season, I would think more midweek opportunities, and we'll see if he can work himself, work up into more.
So to recap, seems there's a group of 6 of, kind of the top of the bullpen guys here for Tennessee. Brandon Arvidsson, Bo Rudy, Cam Appenzeller, Mark Hindi, Braden Krenzel, and then Brady Frederick, who we still expect to see valuable innings. The ETSU transfer, big righty. The lefties of the group are, of course, Hindi, Appenzeller, the talented freshman, and Arvidsson. Blaine Brown, also a lefty if he sees time. Beyond these guys, Ryan, there's a lot of freshman pitchers on this roster. I can go through the names here, but I think it would be easier to just ask you who you have been the most impressed with, and throw Nick Abraham in this group as well. He's the forgotten man of the returners, right?
Yeah.
You have Krenzel, Arvy, and Coons, but hey, Nick Abraham came back, and respect to you, Nick Abraham, because literally everybody else left, and he didn't see hardly any innings a year ago. It's not like he was starting midweeks or anything. Maybe he did very early in the season, but he was not a top midweek arm for Tennessee by any stretch. So the fact he came back, respect for that, to continue to develop under this coaching staff. So I'll toss it to you. Like I said, of these other freshmen, there's 4 lefties in this group: Tracy, Estes, Haas, and Day, and Abraham as well, who is stuck out, if anybody.
Yeah, I would say Abraham. And some of that's maybe just me going with the fact that he did come back, and I think not only does it say a lot about him, I think that says some stuff about how the staff felt about him. I think there were a lot of guys that the staff was, I don't want to say encouraging to leave, but they certainly were not upset about. And Abraham threw the ball great on Sunday, about as good as an outing as I've seen from him. So I would put him up there. Past that, Tracy, again, with a two-way guy as a freshman, it's tough to project, and I do think he's been a little bit better in the field and with his bat. But he's a guy that I could potentially see. He's had some nice moments. And then
by the way, Taylor Tracy, left-handed pitcher, freshman 2A guy. Yeah.
And right-handed in the field, or right-handed hitting. So
is he an infielder or outfielder?
Outfielder. Chandler Day has a really funky release.
Another lefty.
Takes it, from real low and then over the head. I don't even want to say this because I don't like comparing him, but it looks a little bit like Tarek Skubal, just with that type of motion. So, he was up and down, had some moments. Wasn't like he was awesome. Ethan Beato is a right-handed freshman who, I think has been pretty solid. I've liked his stuff. And then I don't think overwhelming by any standpoint with Jackson Estes, I think is how you pronounce his name. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, but a lefty. But he's kind of just like a competitor dude that I was impressed with, which is how solid he was at times. So those are kind of a few names that stand out. Again, maybe one or two of those guys emerge. More likely than not, I think most of those guys are just guys we're going to see in midweeks.
Intriguing too that you mentioned 3 lefties and a righty in that group, but Day, Tracy, and Estes are all lefties. And you talk about the balance of handedness on this pitching staff. Feels like Tennessee has quite a bit of lefties. We talked about 3 in that high-end relief group of Hindi, Appenzeller, and Arvidsson. Blanco, lefty, starter, right? So that's 4 really important pitchers for Tennessee this year. And then you have these 3 freshmen that you just mentioned who, probably won't see SEC time, but definitely talented guys and that have at least shown something. So with that amount of lefties, and then you have some high-end righty talent, it feels like there's a really good balance this year with this staff.
It does feel better than it's been the last handful of years where they've just been searching, for a lefty out of the bullpen. And just I think that's it too.
Dying with Deloy.
Yeah. Yeah. Begging for Binky to give him something. And I think that more than anything too, it's not just, obviously 2 of what we think the 4 best pitchers are, or the 4 starting options are lefties. It's not just you got some high end guys. It feels like there's more depth. And things would really have to go wrong to me for them to be in this position that you're describing. They've been the last few years where it's just they have 1 lefty that could potentially get guys out, or 2. Because obviously Arvidsson emerged last year too.
And it's also good if your prediction in a way, not that you definitively predicted it, but if you are correct in that Bo Rudy ends up being arguably Tennessee's best bullpen arm, of course, aside from Arvidsson if he becomes one, but because then you have all this lefty depth, and hey, your best bullpen guy could be the righty in Bo Rudy. So it's like you have that high-end talent in Rudy as right-hander. You have the consistency and the high floor of Braden Krenzel as a righty. You have Brady Frederick, who all-American prognostications as a righty. And then you have all this lefty depth. I just think this is a sneaky, really key part to this Tennessee team this year is the balance and handedness of this pitching staff. I think they'll be well equipped to handle many situations and have many guys to do it if all these guys can deliver.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Jack, and it's just a lot more different looks. Even with Rudy, he's a unique guy with the fastball that's so good but not super high velo. They do have some high velo guys. You have the to submarine pitcher and Frederick. Like I feel like they have a lot of different complementary pieces that maybe they haven't had the last couple of years when it was more guys that just looked similar.
Mhm.
So I'm high on the pitching staff. Like I think there's, as you could probably note from listening to me, like there's just a little bit of hesitance of like, can one of Tegan Kuhn's or Landon Mack be like a high end one or two, like a good one or two SEC starter? But if one of those guys can be that, and it's not even that I think they can, it's just, I haven't seen it as much. If one of those guys can be that, I think Tennessee's pitching staff is going to be really good.
Who starts Tuesday against UNC Asheville? Nick Abraham?
Yeah, he would be a guy that makes sense. Especially to
yeah,
start
just to
the
kind of
year.
reward him too, right?
Yeah. And I think long term, he would make sense too if all these guys ahead of him pan out. Because if all these guys ahead of him that we're listing ahead of him pan out, then there's just not going to be a ton of opportunities for him in the weekend. Now, all those guys panning out is probably unrealistic because that's usually not how it works. So I think with all that, he would be a guy that would make sense as a midweek guy, and we'll see what he ends up doing this weekend. But I would think this first midweek especially, and it's only one game the first week, that it would be one inning apiece. So maybe less inclined to give him a start because, it's nice in name and all, but if you're throwing one inning, it doesn't mean a whole lot. So maybe more inclined to give him a weekend opportunity this first weekend. But long term, I definitely think that'd be the guy that I think is most likely.
Yeah, it makes sense. And by the way, last thing for the pitching staff, shout out Ethan Bayoto, For Whom the Bell Tolls walk-up song. Riveting article on RockyTopInsider.com breaking down the Tennessee baseball pitcher walk-up songs. There's also one for the hitters. I loved those articles. So I'm so glad I know that going in because, I'm a music guy. And, like, the fact we know that going into the season is so helpful. Like, it's awesome. Have something to look forward to now. There's some other good ones too. Like Alice in Chains made an appearance. Got some Sabbath, Sawyer Deering if he gets some ops. And it's Evan Blanco too with Wood, Alice in Chains. Amazing. All right, let's shift gears and talk about the offensive side of things. Not as much turnover as the pitching staff. There's some more familiar faces here. Tennessee's loaded freshman class a year ago. Those guys are returning, and they're primed for bigger roles. You have Levi Clark. You have Manny Marin. You have Jay Abernathy, Chris Newstrom. There's familiar faces here. Stone Lawless as well, who will begin the season as the starting catcher for Tennessee. But Ryan, before we get into position by position, I do have one big question for each different area of Tennessee's offense, if you will. So one big question for the infield. I had to make it all about my guy, Ariel Antigua. Is this the year for Ariel? People are raving about the offseason Ariel Antigua has had. I know he's been a little banged up here very recently and didn't get much action over the weekend. So maybe that causes a delay in what he can do this weekend against Nichols. But anyway, is this the year Ariel Antigua can finally put it together, be somewhat of a presence offensively, more consistent defensively, and be the walking highlight reel he is for Tennessee?
Yeah, I'll start on the injury note. I think he'll be fine this weekend. I think just playing things real cautiously on Sunday after he got a little banged up sliding into third on Saturday. But yeah, I mean, if there's ever a time, it's now. And he's had a great offseason. He's been pretty darn consistent at the plate. Not that he's hitting for a ton of power, but just as a contact hitter, he's been good and more consistent defensively. Still, sometimes where he tries to do a little too much and probably just put the ball in his pocket. But I think he's going to get the first crack at this thing. If he is healthy, I think he's going to get the start at shortstop on opening day, and I think it'll be well deserved. And I think there's so many questions, and I've been writing about this a little bit before we started recording because my lineup preview will be out on Tuesday. The article, the middle infield, it feels like it all flows from there, and certainly shortstop's that first big question. I think it's very realistic that Ariel and Ariel gets to start. And I'll even add this because to me, what I'm about to say, I would have laughed at in the summer. I think there's a real possibility that Manny could start at short and Ariel at second. Yeah, I think Ariel could start somewhere else in the infield because he doesn't, his arm's not quite as strong. I think Manny's your more prototypical shortstop, but Ariel's been just solid offensively and defensively. That I think it's a possibility now that you could play him at second. again, I think it'll probably be short. What would be my prediction to start the year? But it's a very, very real possibility that this is his time.
So Levi Clark and Henry Ford, they're the corner infielders, right?
I think Levi Clark for sure at first. Henry Ford, I could, that's what I think it'll be on Friday. That's what I think it'll
Okay,
be to start the season. But it wouldn't shock me if he ends up in left field or DH either.
understood. So Ariel starting in the infield, who does that hurt? Chris Newstrom, I guess, and his potential to start in the infield, or Jay Abernathy definitely just becomes an outfield guy? Like those are the two other candidates, right? Like Newstrom could start at second, Manny short. Jay could as well. I have that correct?
Yeah, I think those are the direct guys you would say it hurts, and I think Newstrom more because I think Jay will be the guy in center. I don't
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
think there's the other options there are like Tracy. I think he's the main one, and then it was one of the other freshmen. I'm blanking on who played some center this weekend. So it feels like that's Jay's job.
Well,
I would say indirectly it hurts. I'm blanking on his name. The kid from Walters,
Tyler Myatt.
Tyler Myatt, because I think he could potentially play second, or or third is the other option. Or
Right, I
left.
know he's
But
worked there.
there's a number of options for him. But second, and just like the trickle down effect of, to me, third becomes less likely too.
Okay.
Where I feel like he's obviously not going to play short, but there could be a starting spot for him in the infield, and that feels a lot less likely if Ariel's in there.
Well, my one big question for the outfield was, is Jay Abernathy a full-time outfielder, or will he see time in the infield? So he kind of answered that. Look, he's gotten reps at center. You know how fast he is. If he's going to start for Tennessee, put him in center field. Like, it feels pretty simple. And, we didn't even mention Bates right there in our mini conversation. Like, there's other infielders Tennessee has, too. They have good depth there, so it makes a lot of sense for Jay to be the center fielder.
Yeah, it does. And look, I think he still long term would like to play middle infield, probably shortstop. So I could see him getting some innings there, and maybe even start there early in the season, just because Tennessee wants to reward him and give him that opportunity. But long term, I have a hard time thinking he's not the guy in center. Hudson Chance, I just went back and looked at my notes from yesterday. Hudson Chance was the other guy that got some center field work this past weekend.
All right, one big question for the order for Tennessee. Everyone's favorite question: who is going to be the leadoff guy? Will it be Jay Abernathy?
Yeah, Jay Abernathy and Henry Ford were the guys that got the most opportunities there this weekend. Henry Ford would be the Christian Moore school of thought if he's your best hitter, so get him the most at bats. I think Abernathy will get the first crack at it to me. Just the ceiling there of if he hits the ball well, of how he can kind of change the dynamic. And I think it sets up a nice, lefty righty stack type of situation at the top of the order too. But they could probably work that a couple different ways too. So Jay would be my pick. I will say, before he got scratched and didn't end up playing on Sunday, Ariel was listed as a leadoff hitter. So if he's going to go out there and be an elite leadoff, be an elite contact hitter, then sure, why not put him in that spot? I tend to think that 9-hole and kind of like the second leadoff type guy, probably ends up making more sense. So.
Yeah, I feel like Ariel leadoff would be a bit of a talk about a 180 from what he was, what he's been.
He also just doesn't take a ton of pitches. Like, he doesn't walk a ton. And I think that's a knock on. I think that's a knock on Jay too, a little bit. But he sees more pitches, and I think that's an important part of a leadoff hitter that doesn't often get talked about. The guy that's going to come in there and set the tone and let some other guys see the starter to start the game.
I didn't play baseball in college or anything, but it feels like obviously rhythm is such a big part of things, getting into a groove of the season. And I thought early on in SEC play, I remember the Bama series, there were a couple of times where Jay Abernathy was putting together some really solid at-bats, battling, had some multi RBI singles that were huge late in games. Like, he had moments early in SEC play, but as Dalton Bargo kind of reemerged and became a lineup staple, and with what Levi Clark brought to the table as DH, Jay Abernathy just kind of fell to the wayside, just because it's kind of how it went. You had Inslee and Chapman. You weren't going to tinker with the infield. That was just how it was. So it was kind of unfortunate for him the way things played out a year ago. And my point with the rhythm part of it is that his appearances late in the season were not as good, and maybe that had to do with just the lack of reps he was getting. But you saw the potential with Jay Abernathy, and I think he could be a key player for this Tennessee team. Hit leadoff, start and center, and if Tennessee can, if he can be good enough to where he gets on base at a high clip, the speed is there. Tennessee's never been an aggressive base running team, but this is your chance with a guy like this.
Yeah, no doubt. He I think is going to have a longer leash. There's the guys in the lineup I feel like are just staples that are going to be in there every day. And then there's the true competition, and then there's guys that, it wouldn't be stunning if they don't end up starting, but it feels like they have a pretty long leash. And to me, Jay's in that boat. You want to see some consistency from him, and I certainly think that's possible. And yeah, it'll be, again, the defense aspect I think is big there too. Like, can he be consistent? Because his ceiling's super high defensively. Can he be really good defensively in center field? Because that'll make his leash even longer. And if he's really good defensively in center field and aerial finds consistency, Tennessee defensively up the middle should be pretty darn good.
What J.O.'s defensively last year was ballsy. He took the chances, and sometimes they didn't pay off, but sometimes they did. He made some plays, but also he missed some plays diving for balls when he was starting there and left. But look, the talent's there. Let's wrap up the infield discussion here. So, talked about Levi Clark at first base. No, he's going to start there. Beyond him, some of these catchers, Garrett Wright, Stone Wallace, we know can play first base. If it's not Levi Clark, who is it? I guess is my question. Is it just whoever's not catching? Is there anybody else that should be named to know? Grimmer potentially.
Grimmer, yeah. Grimmer would be the only other one, but I think Levi's, barring there being a lot of injuries at catcher and Levi needing to catch, I think Levi's going to be a starting first baseman on this team.
So if it's not Manning, Chris Newstrom in the middle infield, it's Manning and Ariel. Though outside of those three, who has the best chance to start there? Is it Tyler Myatt?
Yeah, Tyler Myatt or maybe Finley Bates. Bates would be better defensively than Myatt, but Myatt's bat I think especially started coming around late in the fall and has been good in the preseason. So he's the one that I'd be more curious to see how he makes his mark, or maybe if one of these freshmen does emerge in the outfield, maybe it's Jay Abernathy. But I tend to think it's going to be some combination of Ariel, Manny, and Newstrom.
Third base, talked about expectation is Henry Ford starts there opening day. Feels like every year Tennessee just brings in a third baseman who can hit for power. Last year, dude just didn't end up playing third base. He played first base, but of course Andrew Fisher was projected to be that. But look, you have Henry Ford. Blake Grimmer can also play third base. He did some a year ago. You mentioned Myatt gets reps there. If it's not Ford, which it doesn't sound like you were as confident he will be a season-long starter, as say Clark, of course, at first, who would it be?
Myatt or Newstrom or Grimmer. I mean, like, it's the guys you said. It's I think Henry Ford that's where he's going to start at. So, and he's obviously he's going to be in the lineup. It just depends does he struggle there defensively, and do you end up moving someone else there? But I mean, even to that point, like, Myatt's got question marks defensively. Grimmer has not. I think he's gotten a lot better, but that's been the knock on him in the past. This is defense. So, besides Newstrom, it's not like there's any guy there that you feel phenomenal about. And to me, third and left field are the ultimate moving pieces.
The ones.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of different guys that can play there. A lot of different guys that are borderline. I mean, Manny, heck, could end up being a third if you need him to. Like, there's a bunch of different guys that can play those spots. And, it's Ford is, I think, plan number one here. And if it gets beyond that, like, I think there's just a bunch of different options.
Mentioned Blake Grimmer as an X factor, and he ties into this discussion heavily as these are his two spots, left and third. When he comes back, is it your expectation that he ultimately becomes a part of the starting lineup, and how does that shake things up in your opinion?
I wouldn't say my expectation, but I mean, toss up. Before the injury, I would have said like toss up. 40-60 maybe now, because he's, who knows if he's going to be. He's going to have to get back into a rhythm. I guess is to say, I'm sure he'll be 100% when he's playing or close to it when he actually starts playing. he had a good fall. He's always been a good hitter, and he's continued to get better. And I think he is a high ceiling hitter too, from the standpoint of what he can do as a power hitter. And I think he works really good at bats too, from what we've seen in the past. So very much he is right on the border to me, and I would probably have him on the outside looking in, even before the back soreness and him getting off to a little bit slower start, but very, very, very much on the border to me.
You think left field's more likely for him though, just with the plan to roll with Ford at third to start the year? Like if Grimmer gets into action, say next weekend, I feel like left has to be more likely, right?
Probably, but to me it feels similar. Like I'll say this, and I think the three best hitters on this Tennessee team are going to be Henry Ford, Levi Clark, and Blaine Brown.
Okay.
So Blaine Brown is, I think, going to start in left field. Same question. He has not played a bunch of left field in his career. He's been a little bit shaky there when he has played there in practice. He had a real bad play when I watched last week on Tuesday. Again, that's one instance. It's not the biggest deal in the world. So when you're asking that question for Grimmer, if it's next weekend, I maybe say DH. But Grimmer Brown to me, like if both those guys are in the lineup, which I think if you're going to talk about Tennessee scoring the most runs, maybe not from a run prevention standpoint, but that's best case scenario for Tennessee scoring the most runs. If both those guys pan out, one of those guys is going to be a DH.
So Blaine Brown is a lineup staple in your opinion?
Yes, in my opinion.
But Blake Grimmer is not.
No. I think he's more trying to prove himself, earn a role.
And if he does, it feels like the odd man out in this whole situation would be Tyler Myatt, because if he's not starting in the infield and Ford's at third and Brown's at left or Grimmer's at left and the others at DH, then Tyler Myatt's just the odd man out because he's not starting in center or right, and he's not starting at first, second, or short or catcher. So that's just how it goes, right?
Yeah, I would think he'd be the odd man out. Now the other scenario that I will throw out there, I gotta watch myself because I got myself a little bit of trouble 2 years ago for something I said on the pod. If Reese Chapman struggles,
yeah, which he can.
How long of a leash does he have? Because he certainly had a lot of struggles to end last year. Now he's a very good defender, and you trust him from that standpoint. You trust him from a leadership standpoint. But if he struggles, he's the guy that we're penciling in as a starter because he's a returning starter, as we should. He's going to start these first 3 weeks of the season. It would shock me if he's not Tennessee's starter when they get things going at Georgia to start SEC play. But, if he's a guy that ends up falling out, Henry Ford played a lot of right field at Virginia. I think that changes the dynamics and, potentially alters opportunities.
And Myatt can play there, right? Like that's where
he can play there, but I think he'd be more like for someone else to move there, like Henry Ford, and then him to take that spot.
Oh,
because right field's a more premium defensive position compared to left. Third, I guess you could argue, but Myatt doesn't have a whole lot of experience there. So I would, and Henry Ford has a lot. So I would think he would be a guy that goes there first.
So if Chapman were to struggle, you could see Ford in right, Brown in left, and Grimmer at third.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, again, it's a lot of versatility and a lot of different options of how things could end up, unfolding.
And Chris Newstrom, not a lineup staple, in your opinion?
To me, he's on the right, to use my college basketball terms, he's on the right side of the bubble right now, but he's a bubble guy.
And he's never DHing.
I mean, I won't say never, but
it doesn't like
it doesn't feel like his bat is a carrying strength the way that some of these other guys is.
He was such a Tony guy last year too. Tony loved Chris Newstrom.
He did, yeah. We'll get, yeah.
No, go ahead.
I just have, there's something else I could add to that point, but we'll save it for later because I was going to fit it in a different part.
Okay. Catcher to wrap up the offense of, defensive starter type of deal. Stone Lawless is going to start at catcher opening day. Garrett Wright's the other guy here. You mentioned Trent Grindlinger, the freshman.
Yes, not Grind.
Right, Grindlinger. Maybe he gets some midweek opportunities, but catcher's been a spot where Tennessee hasn't had just a dude since, Pav. Like, I mean, Evan Russell was the guy at catcher, but Tennessee has not had a catcher that, the opposing teams feared really, or that was just without a doubt that dude, even in the last couple of years with Cal and Stone and Cannon Peebles, of course. Can Tennessee have that guy this year, or will it just be more rotation with Stone and Garrett Wright?
No, I think Stone's the guy. I don't know if I don't think Stone's going to be a bat in the lineup that people fear. But
Right,
look,
but you
even
would say
Pav wasn't that.
correct, but he started all 3 games. Like, you think Stone Laws is going to start
I
all
think
3
Stone.
games?
I think Stone will start all 3 games. Yeah.
Okay, so Garrett Wright is not going to be a guy that you would expect to be a consistent contributor in the SEC play. Then
I wouldn't say I expect, but he's in the mix because of what he can also do outfield wise. Like Stone, I think he's such an Elander guy. He's really good defensively. We'll see what his bat ends up being. I mean, he hit the ball well in the preseason. He had a home run over the weekend. He hit the ball well in the fall. He's a little bit of he needs to prove it against good competition because he struggled a lot against SEC. So it's me saying that Stone is 3 games of catcher is more about Stone than it is Garrett Wright. And Garrett Wright has different ways that he can impact the team.
Okay. Let's do some.
I will say, in my article coming out, probably as you're listening to this, I projected the lineup, and then I said the first off the bench guys, and I've listed 3 guys as first off the bench because when I started listing more, it just felt like, all right, if you're going to include this guy, you got to include that guy. Garrett Wright was the 3rd guy in that option.
Okay. Well, hey, let's do it. Let's go through your lineup in order 1 through 9. Ryan Schumpert's lineup projection, because by the time people are listening, it's on the site.
Yeah, Jay Abernathy.
Okay,
center field.
First, lead off.
3rd base, Henry Ford.
2-hole, kind of like Andrew Fisher a year ago, the star in the 2-hole.
Designated hitter, Blaine Brown.
Okay.
First baseman, Levi Clark.
Got it.
Second baseman, Manny Marin. Right fielder, Reese Chapman. Left fielder, Chris Newstrom. Catcher, Stone Lawless. Shortstop, Ariel Antigua. Blake Grimmer, Tyler Myatt, Garrett Wright. The 3 guys I'm listing as first off the bench.
Tyler Myatt, Garrett Wright. Who would be next?
The guy we haven't talked about?
Yeah.
Nate Eisfelder. True freshman outfielder. He's looked good. He looked good in the fall. He's been on fire here. He's going to get opportunities early. I could see him being a guy that, enters himself into the mix. And then, I'd probably throw Finley Bates in there just because he can play all the infield spots and, is an option. So those would be probably the next 2 guys. But then I felt like, Tracy. Tracy's been good. And
2-way guy who got center reps, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we have Nate Eisfelder. He's your top freshman as far as who could potentially contribute?
Yeah, and Grinlinger I should have added into that mix too. Him and Grinlinger would be 1A, 1B.
Who's got the best bat?
I'll say Grinlinger.
Okay,
but they're both good. I mean, they've both been good, and I haven't charted every scrimmage, so I couldn't tell you.
No, I understand.
That's just a pure sitting there watching them, and the probably dozen times I've watched, in the offseason, I've watched them scrimmage. Vibes. They both have had their moments and have been good.
Yeah, and look, a lot of these guys are freshmen. Grinlinger, Eisfelder, Hudson Chance, who you mentioned a couple of minutes ago. Evan Hankins, Ethan Moore. There's a lot of freshmen in this group. Cash Williams. And then you have Finley Bates, and he's a junior transfer from San Diego State. So it's a fun group of depth. We talked about the pitching staff depth. What's your confidence level in the depth of Tennessee's offense and the options they have? Because it feels like those first couple of guys, the outside looking in, the bubble guys, there's a lot of talent there.
Yeah, I think it's, and this is minute 109 of a podcast that we're not, we're filming late at night and we're not quite done with. So track with me. It feels a bit like the SEC schedule. I feel really good about the top couple guys just in general.
Yeah.
And I think they're good from a first guys off the bench standpoint. What about the middle? You said my question for the lineup is, I feel really good about Levi Clark, 2nd year jump, becoming a star. Can any of these other sophomores that played last year as freshmen do that? to me, that's the big question. Can Reese Chapman become more consistent?
Mm.
Does Ariel emerge as I don't think he's going to be a star bat, and he's going to be a guy that, is, OPS is anything, crazy, or 700 OPS or anything like that. But can he be a reliable bat? Can Stone prove that he is a good SEC hitter, and not just a really good guy defensively? So that's kind of where I'm at. I like the depth in the standpoint that there's a bunch of different guys that I think are capable of playing, and I like that those three guys I said at the top: Blaine Brown, Levi Clark, and Henry Ford. I got a lot of trust in them. It's kind of that middle. Can a couple guys emerge as legit options and legit bats to be feared, to give Tennessee a more even lineup and not as top heavy as they were a season ago?
All right, final thing, just super quick questions about the offense, and then we'll get into some big picture things. Is Henry Ford the best player on this team? Yes or no?
Best hitter.
Best hitter.
I won't say best player. I'll go Arv.
Okay, understood. But offensively, best player.
Yeah, I think so.
You kind of maybe said it. Most likely sophomore to take a leap between Marin, Clark, Abernathy, Newstrom. Who's going to be the star of this group?
Levi.
I guess S. Fielder would be your most likely freshman to pop.
Yeah, I think there's more paths for him than Grinlinger, just because the outfield and not that Grinlinger couldn't go in and play left or DH, but it just feels like more options for Eisfelder.
And outside Henry Ford, Blaine Brown, highest upside. He has the best chance to be a star of the transfer class.
Yep.
All right, there you have it. That's the offense. All right, let's. We're gonna wrap with some superlatives, bold predictions, really quick stuff, and I have some overarching questions. But let's keep the fun rolling with the superlative-esque questions here. Who's your X factor on offense, Ryan?
I think it's Blake Grimmer, just because
Okay.
of the ceiling. He's the bubble guy that I think has the highest ceiling as a hitter. So if he can reach that ceiling and he can find somewhere, and look, if he reaches the ceiling, it doesn't matter. He'll be in there somewhere and he'll be DH. But he's the guy I think that can change the dynamic as much as anybody on the bubble.
Of the starting rotation, who's the X factor?
Yeah, it's good. I'll say Teagan because I think he's got the highest ceiling of that group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to agree. Bullpen wise, who's your X factor there? Is it Rudy with that low 90s awesome fastball?
I think he's less X factor. I'll say Appenzeller's X factor because he's got such good stuff, and it just the unknown as a true freshman.
Cam Appenzeller, the freshman lefty out of Illinois. Let's talk about defensively. Who's the X factor there? To me, it's got to be Ariel, right? Because you've seen the flashes, and if he's that every game, holy cow.
Yeah, I think Ariel is. Ariel, I think, is just obvious for what you said, and then if not Ariel, I'll say Jay because super athletic. I think could be really really good defensively in center, but he hasn't played a ton of center, so how quickly does some of that stuff come to him?
More likely to be the reason this team makes Omaha, Henry Ford or Brandon Arvidsson?
I'll say Henry Ford because and look, this is maybe a greater philosophy question, and maybe this is me being too connected to Tennessee. And look, 23 team didn't have very good offense, and they got to Omaha. But I just think more to have the highest ceiling in the sport, it's more about being really, really good offensively and then just figuring out some of the stuff pitching wise. So because of that reason, and because I probably am higher on the pitching staff as a whole, I'll say Henry Ford.
Very good answer. Kind of already answered this one. Position group most likely to rotate the most is third or left. I think you answered that one.
Yes. Well, I would say left, but those two are the clear 1-2 to me.
Who hits the most home runs on the team?
I'll say Blaine Brown.
Ooh, I figured you'd say
Yeah.
Henry Ford. Okay.
Yeah.
Who's
No.
going to have the best batting average?
I'll say Henry Ford there.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that I would really give the watch out for. Maybe Ariel, I guess, would be to watch out for. Just because he's going to be a guy that's not going to walk a ton. He's not going to hit for a lot of power. So he could be a guy that hits a lot of singles and has a high average because of that.
Ryan Schumpert, an aerial advocate in 2026? What is happening?
Well, that's an X
A
factor.
revelation.
And I certainly would, if you're asking me OBP, I certainly would not have aerial, which I think is a better reflection of how good of an offensive player you are than batting average.
That is true.
But I don't think Ariel's going to walk a ton, so that's why I could see it being if he's a good enough hitter. He's not going to hit for power. And I don't think he's going to walk a ton. So if he's a good enough hitter to be in there every day, I think his batting average is going to be pretty high.
Which starter has the lowest ERA?
All right, this is we're getting into the bold predictions. This is one of my bold predictions here.
Okay, there we go. Bold prediction number 1.
I'm going Evan Blanco.
Okay,
I just think
love it.
The blow up opportunities are lower for him. I think he's more steady. I think he, from a week in, week out standpoint, isn't going to pitch as many innings, which I typically think is good for your ERA. Like, you have the high end pitchers that'll get deep into games and then they're given a little bit more leeway and then they end up giving up a couple runs that hurts the ERA where they're still the best pitcher, maybe, but the ERA isn't quite as good. So I'll go Blanco.
The bullpen guys, the high end bullpen guys, who has the lowest ERA?
Arv, if we're going to count him. I mean,
I'm going to say you can only count guys who will never start.
Then I'll go Bo Rudy because I don't think Bo Rudy's going to start any games. He's a straight bullpen guy.
Arvidsson will, in the postseason, if he never starts somehow and it's the same 3 every weekend, he will be the 4th guy, right? I think we expect that.
Yeah. I mean, The thing is he could, in one of those games, end up pitching in the bullpen first to where it,
right,
doesn't allow it. But yeah,
I guess Krenzel would be the other one, right? So
yeah, and Krenzel could be a good option there.
And then who tosses the most strikeouts?
Arvidsson.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be close either.
Okay. My only bold prediction, I only made one. And look, you know way more about this team than I do. Catch me right before SEC play when I've seen a month of ball. But look, I think you look at this offense and what I expect the consistency to be out of the sophomore class. Clark, Abernathy, Marin, Newstrom, if he plays consistently. The stud component of Henry Ford. I think that if Blaine Brown hits 18 or more home runs, that this will be a top 10 team in college baseball. And in all likelihood, reach Omaha. Omaha is such a fickle thing to reach. Anything can happen in the postseason. It's kind of weak to make those projections. But I think Tennessee is an Omaha caliber team if Blaine Brown hits 18 or more home runs. And right now, they're not really projected to be as such. They're a fringe regional host. So it's kind of bold.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's not the boldest, but yeah, I think it categorizes as bold because I don't. And look, I haven't been scouring everybody's 8 for Omaha, but the ones that have come across my timeline, I haven't seen Tennessee on, really any of them. So I think that's fair. My other bold one is one of the sophomores doesn't end up being an everyday starter.
Well, of the 3 or of the 4?
Of the 4.
Okay. So if Newstrom isn't an everyday starter, is that bold?
I think that would be bold to most the fan base. Yeah.
Okay.
I think most of the fan base probably, maybe the diehards, it's not. The guys that are reading all the practice reports in the fall, but just your average Tennessee baseball fan who does watch a lot of the games and follows the team closely in the season. I think those people expect all 4 of those guys to be starters. And Newstrom is the one that's most likely to me, but I don't think it's the only option.
You had him starting in left opening day.
Yes.
Brown at DH.
Yep, correct.
Yeah, okay. So Grimmer's the one who can throw a wrench into this. Brown ultimately starting defense can complicate things. But if Ariel becomes an everyday guy, I think that makes things tough on Newstrom to be an everyday person. I think Ariel struggling makes it really easy for Newstrom to just start every game.
It certainly limits the path because if Ariel's at short and Henry Ford holds up at third, like it has to be, in left field essentially for Newstrom. Because and look, maybe Manny is the guy that doesn't end up being it. I wouldn't say that's impossible, but I certainly have more confidence in him than Newstrom at this point.
There you go. Do you have a season-long prediction of what this team ends up doing?
Not at this moment. Yeah, I'll have it. I'll have my season prediction on Thursday with basically all the accolades we just talked about. Maybe a couple other ones too. Maybe a little more concise written reason of why I picked everybody. And heck, maybe I'll have changed my mind on something by Thursday. But not at this moment.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing I wanted to talk about. It's not really a question. It's just a talking point. And there's no reason to have any sort of negativity about what the Elander can be. I think Elander's a stud, and I think Tennessee's going to be a perennial contender under him. But here's the one thing I'm curious about in the post Tony era. There were so many times where Tennessee was just back against the wall, like this is it, and they brought it every time. Like you just knew that Tennessee was going to bring it. Granted, there may be some other times, but look at the Clemson Regional in 23. They were not the better team. They brought it and they won. There's so many times. You think about all the great moments Tennessee had in the Vitello era, late game spots where they delivered way more times than they delivered than they didn't. They were the team to beat in those spots. Tennessee has a ton of talent this year, and they will next year, and they will most years under Josh. And I think the development will be awesome with this coaching staff. But will they have that extra gear to them? Will they have that will to win? I don't know. And not saying they can't. I'm not saying they definitely will, but that is the thing I am most intrigued by, and the thing I'll be watching a lot when SEC play rolls around is how this team responds to adversity, and if they can be the team that always rises to the occasion when the backs are against the wall.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And I'm planning on it being out on Friday morning. A story from conversations with a bunch of former players, kind of about what's different about Elander, what's Elander and Tony, and what's the same. And it'd be hard for me to. I'm sitting here with the doc that has all my quotes on it, so it's kind of tough for me to uh, find some of the quotes. But I guess to sum it up, a lot of those guys said, yes, Elander's more laid back. Yes, he's not as fiery as Tony. But basically, like, don't get it twisted. Like he's got the same drive to win, and he's not afraid to get in your ass like about stuff either. So I think that's question, is the root of what your question is kind of from that standpoint, because Tony had such a fight or flight personality in those moments he was going to bow up. I think Elander has that. Elander has that maybe more than people think. Now, it doesn't mean I don't think that's a fair question, because I think any question about Josh Elander is fair because we don't know and it's new.
Right.
Here's a good one from Griffin Merritt. Josh is more even kill, laid back, doesn't jump to conclusions. But when you need a kick in the ass, Josh is going to drop the hammer. He's a big dude from Texas. He's not going to get pushed around.
Right.
So because that was a consistent, when I had those conversations, a consistent quote, because they are so different. But it was very much like don't get it twisted. Elander is extremely competitive too. So I think that's a completely fair question, but and we'll what happens on the field will be to tell. But from what I know about Josh and what people have played for him said, I think I feel pretty good about his team's ability to respond in those moments too.
There you have it, Josh Eland. Yeah, go ahead.
And I think I'm just completely rambling, but I think the last fall is going to be good for this team when it comes to adversity. I mean, they faced a whole lot of adversity already. They faced more adversity to this point than certainly any Tennessee team I've covered, and I don't think many teams in general have faced as much adversity than this Tennessee team has by the time they take the field for game number 1.
Yeah, that's a good point. That had to make them stronger, right? A coaching change in the fall, it's very rare. So
yeah, a coaching change in the fall and just the scene of it all for a week of the unknown after the first report had been out there. Like it was, and people around the program consistently very complimentary of how the players handled that. There wasn't a whole lot of woe is us or woe is me that this is happening to us. It was guys ready to handle their business, and certainly they all really wanted Josh to get the job, but guys that were ready to go out there and compete this spring.
Right. I mean, only once has a college baseball coach gone from that to head ball manager of a major league team. Well, only once has a college baseball team had their coach leave to become the manager of a major league team. That is this group. We'll see how they fare in 2026. They open the season against Nichols February 13th. That is Friday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. Then a couple of day games to follow to round out the series, 1 o'clock Eastern on both Saturday and Sunday, all 3 games on SEC Network Plus. Believe as of right now, there's projected to be 8 games televised nationally this season for Tennessee. But we have how many games before Texas? 7. 2 weekend series and no, 8, right? Yeah, 8. Can't do math.
Yes.
2 weekend series and 2 midweekers. The other weekend series is Kent State. The 2 midweekers are UNC Asheville and Bellarmine, before Tennessee goes to Arlington to take on UCLA, Arizona State, Virginia Tech. And then we'll get into March. And then it'll be March Madness, and then it'll be SEC play. And then before you know it, it'll be Hoover and regionals and potentially supers in Omaha. And it just keeps going on and on and on. And then it's football season again. The Super Bowl is just last night. But it's been a fun time. Hope you guys, if you listened to the whole thing, thank you, and hope you learned a lot, because I feel like I want to make this podcast to where if you don't know anything at all about what this team is, what they look like, who's competing for which position, we covered all the bases, and you kind of have a good understanding of who these players are, what this team's going to look like, everything about it. So it's the ultimate primer, in my opinion. And 4 days, Ryan, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, excited for it. It's here, and yeah, this is always a fun exercise to get us into it and gets the juices flowing and ready to go.
That's right. Well, that's Ryan Schumpert. You can follow him at rshump00 on.
Can.
Wait, no, can we? Yeah, I can't say anymore. He I mean, Ryan got hacked, so he's Twitterless. I don't know what are we gonna do? What's the plan?
Yeah.
Do you have a plan?
I mean, we don't need to bore the people with the plan. I mean, it's an ongoing situation.
When are you gonna call it? Do you have a date of when you're just gonna call it and start a new one?
I just keep pushing that date back because I really don't want to do that.
Want to do it? Yeah. God, that's so depressing. Oh.
I would say the worst, the very last stand. If I don't have my Twitter now, I think there's a good chance if I don't have my Twitter, I'll have started a new Twitter by then. But if I don't have a Twitter by March 1st, there will be a new Twitter.
Dang, that's still quite a bit of time. All right, well, we'll have to keep tabs on that. In the meantime, follow at Rocky Top Insider on your social media platforms. You can also follow me at Jack Foster Media. I'll be tweeting a lot more during baseball seasons. That's just kind of how it goes for me. Before Ryan, I'm Jack. See you next time on the RTI Diamond Pass.